Welcome to the premiere episode of Innovator Insights, the podcast where we explore the minds and journeys of today's most inspiring innovators. In this episode, we sat down with Robert Baker, a serial entrepreneur and CEO of GAT Labs. Robert shares how his journey from building his first IP router to founding a company that continues to revolutionize cloud security and management was shaped by early lessons in business, maths, and innovation. We touch on challenges of scaling, the value of solving real problems, and his advice for entrepreneurs looking to make their mark. Stay tuned for a conversation full of insights, inspiration, and actionable takeaways.
Welcome to the Innovator Insights podcast. I'm Scott Fisher, the head of U.S. Market Development for GAT Labs. I'm pleased to have Robert Baker, serial entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of GAT Labs, as our first guest. Welcome, Robert.
Scott, pleasure. The honor is mine.
Thank you for being here today. So why don't we start off in the beginning? Tell us a bit about your childhood, what initially sparked your interest in the cybersecurity field?
So, I guess I first came into contact with computers really in college. And it began when I was working on, as a student, on digital VAC systems. DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, were a very famous micro computer development company based out of Boston, and they developed an architecture called VAX, which I think actually to this day runs the American nuclear arsenal. So they built very reliable systems. But in college, I was exposed to VAX, and my first contact with cybersecurity really occurred there when actually one of my classmates broke into a VAX, as it happened, and it caused quite a stir on campus. So I was always interested in cybersecurity since back then.
Terrific. Well, were there any role models or particular experiences that shaped your career path?
Yeah, well, I think, again, going back to college, I was lucky enough in my third year in college to get what was called then a co-op job or an internship. And the college itself offered me an internship in the IT department, which was a little bit unusual because I was in the applied maths department, but I guess I was hanging around the computers often enough that I came to their attention. So I was lucky enough to get a job in the IT department, and my manager there was a guy who, he became a role model for me. He was really interested in operating systems, and I became interested in operating systems as well, as opposed to just doing software development. And we had different problems to solve. One was actually extending the university library system at the time from, I think, a 6-digit code to a 7-digit code, which involved actually bringing the library archive over from another type of computer, an ICL mainframe, over to the VAX. So that exposed me to the need for networking, although we solved the problem at the time with mag tapes. But I could see if only I had a network to join these two computers together, like we had between the VAXs, it would be so cool.
Yes, it would have. So in addition to your role model there, what role did your family play? And did they give you any, or does your background give you any special assistance with your preparation?
Well, I think one thing is the exposure to what you're interested in, and the other is how you exploit that. And my family probably had the largest influence on how I exploited my interest in computers, because I came from a small shop. We had a small farm, typical, rural life. Lots of people did lots of things. My dad was also a teacher, as it happened. So, but mostly I think the small shop and the shop and the farm influenced me, because I was exposed to business I never realized there was anything to life other than business. In the shop, I knew we bought things at this price and we sold them at that price, and there was a margin. Right. And that came as naturally to me as milk. So, and the same on the farm. I could see if we produced stuff on the farm, we had to sell it, whether it was to the dairy or locally. So I realized, you do work, you produce goods. There's a margin on the goods, you make a profit, and that's how you survive. So right through from the very beginning, I never realized there was any type of work other than entrepreneurial work. And I think every farmer is probably the same, every shopkeeper is probably the same. So yeah, that had a big influence on my entrepreneurship.
And how about your education, your technical training? Can you tell me about that and what you found most valuable in preparing for the career you now have in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so basically, when I went to college, I did applied mathematics, and in that particular discipline, um, what captured my attention most was game theory and stats, but in particular game theory. Um, I was lucky. One of our lecturers, his own father was a mathematician who was very involved in the development of matrix theory for D-Day, which calculated the losses that the Allies were likely to suffer when soldiers landed on the beaches in Normandy. I thought, God, this is just such an amazing, the application of maths to such a tangential task is amazing. And all true. I guess applied maths is all about, applying mathematical models to real life situations and understanding that they can be modeled reasonably accurately using pure maths, but getting real life results. So I think that had a big influence on how I ran my businesses. So I'm by nature a pretty cautious guy, but I always like to calculate the odds, calculate the yield, and so on. So I will take a risk if the yield is sufficient, and that's just all from my maths training, I'm sure.
Okay, but now having the ability to look back a little bit, are there any skills or anything that your education or your training maybe it didn't provide you, or something that you wish you might have focused a little bit more on?
Well, I guess if anything, I probably two things. I guess I arrived a little too early just for the start of the internet. I was right there at the start, but I was a little bit too old. I won't say it passed me by, because I built my first IP router in 1989, which was before most people even heard of the internet. But had I been that bit younger, IP protocols, things like that would have been on as perhaps a subject in college, and I would have studied them more deeply. But I think the other thing is that, again, going back to my maths, probably like a lot of people in my generation, I married shortly after college, and that became a trade-off, because you have a family, you're committed to family,
Sure.
and you can't do sort of the wild things that you'd like to do. I had opportunities to work in the States, I had opportunities to work in London, and so on. But if you've started a family and you've put down a base, that kind of restricts your activity slightly as an entrepreneur. And plus, if you're committed to family, you just can't be, 16 hours a day in an office and have a normal family life. That's not fair either. So, But having said that, and now at the stage with two grandchildren, I wouldn't have changed the thing. I felt I got the balance as good as I could. I didn't give too much to my work, and kept a lot back for my family. So that was a trade-off I had. Yeah, and they're the trade-offs in life, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's what it's all about, is family, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. In the end, absolutely. Yeah. Everything one does, if you have a family, it probably turns out to be for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to get too sentimental here, but
no, I understand completely. So, with all of that experience and training, what was it that actually motivated you to create GAT Labs? Was there a specific problem in this cybersecurity landscape that you were looking to address, or how did that come about?
So that was quite an interesting story. One of my earlier companies, in fact, the company I had just before this one was a networks and security company. And very early on, after Google launched Gmail, one of our customers actually was a very large sports organization. And we used to look after the mail servers for them. And they approached us saying, could we upgrade? Now, they wanted to go from, I think, around 600 accounts to bringing in all the club secretaries and so on. It was going to take them up to around 12,000 accounts. And when you looked at what was involved to supply that in-house, it was going to be a huge change of infrastructure for them and cost. So just at that time, I had read actually in The Economist about Google launching a Gmail product the year before. I think it was for the University of Arizona. I think it was the first college that took it on. But at any rate, Google's European headquarters were in Dublin, and it prompted us to approach Google and say, look, we're very interested in this cloud email offering you have, where we can assign a domain name to your cloud offering, and essentially they use Gmail. So after about a year or so, we got the dealership for Google Workspace for Ireland. That was about 2009. And luckily enough, we put it straight into this account, and it went really well. And the account was very, very happy with the solution. But one of the things they said was, look, this is brilliant, but on the old server system, we knew who was emailing who and who was sharing files with who. Right. Now we haven't a clue what's going on. Nobody knows what emails are coming in and out. Nobody knows who's sharing what documents with other people. Can you do anything about that? And again, often entrepreneurship is a series of fateful events that fall your way. Google had just announced that they had made APIs available for Workspace as it became. And I had some developers working for me as well. And I went back to them and said, guys, what can we do to plug into these APIs and get a deeper understanding of file sharing, emailing, and so on? And out of that, GAT Labs was born. GAT was born. First of all, it was the Google audit tool. And then Google wrote to me saying, hey, you can't call yourself Google, we're Google.
Okay.
So fair enough. So then we became the general audit tool, GAT. And after that, then GAT Labs, as GAT itself became more generic and, had less to do with just auditing the environment and a lot more to do with security. So that was the path that took us through to GAT Labs. And I grew that business inside my old networking and security business. And eventually in 2019, I'd sold off the networking and security business and focused just purely on GAT Labs.
And that was your intent, was you got rid of the others so that you could dedicate your full time and efforts to GAT Labs.
Exactly. We had the first audit and security app in the marketplace before anybody else. Within a year, we had 1 million users covered by it. So I don't know how many domains that was. Initially, we put it in for free, and in fact, we didn't start charging for it until about 2016. So it had grown, like it had proved really popular. Within my old business, I was spending quite a bit developing it and paying for the engineers and so on, but still making this product for free. And I could see, this really has legs. This can stand on its own. And when we started to charge for it, I was proved correct because people were willing to pay for what we were offering. But of course, once you charge, then you have to up your game. The quality of the UI has to improve. The quality of service has to improve, and
support.
So on. Right. Support, exactly. I was very conscious of that, actually. One of the better things about running an infrastructure firm is you realize how important support and service is, because infrastructure is, infrastructure support is a support and service game. When you're managing networks, when you're managing firewalls, when you're managing security on behalf of other companies, what you're really doing is you're offering hand-holding and support. And that's just critical if you want your business to be a success. So I always appreciated the value of service and the quality of service that must be offered to customers. And I think that that helped us, again, after we launched and started to charge. I noticed a lot of SaaS companies, even though it stood for software as a service, the part that they didn't focus on was the service part. So we're good on the software, but not too good on the service. So
that helped you to stand apart.
I made
GAT
sure
Labs.
both S's were the same size. Yeah, it's not just S, little a, capital S again. It's yeah, both of those are capital S's. Yeah.
Understood. Right. Okay. So now you've walked through a little bit of your experience as an entrepreneur, but is there maybe a particularly large challenge that you faced in your early days of tech that you could tell me about, and maybe how you overcame it, or any particular lessons that you might have learned along the way?
So I guess one of the things I learned from the security and networking business is the difficulty in scaling, particularly where you're doing something where there's no well-defined problem. And if you're managing a customer's network, every customer has a different network, has a different architecture,
Right.
different firewalls, and so on. So it's very difficult to scale that type of business. You need a very well-defined problem set. And if you're in the service business, the problem set is not necessarily well defined, because every customer has their own unique problems. So if you can control the problem, you can define it better, and then you can scale easily. So I realized scaling was, that was one difficulty I always had with my infrastructure business, was scaling it, finding enough good people that would work with me to maintain the same level of support and the same standards that I'd set for our core customers. So we always had, a reasonable sized core customer base, but scaling beyond that, I was never able to achieve that before.
Right.
Never able to achieve it before with the infrastructure. I'd done it before with software, and I knew I could do it again with software. That's one of the attractions of software. You can scale very, very easily with it, relatively speaking.
Right. Right. Okay. So now let's turn to innovation and tell me what you think innovation is.
So yeah, this talk really is about Innovator Insights. So I've been giving it some thought before this, and I think innovation can essentially be broken down into two main types. First of all, there's fundamental innovation, which causes a paradigm shift in how society does a particular function, and that occurs in different areas. In communication, I guess the big paradigm shifts were, first of all, the printing press, which resulted in newspapers and books and the ability to retain and distribute ideas freely and easily. The next major paradigm shift actually didn't occur until really the telephone arrived, when communication then went from being printed to being instant. You could ring up somebody and talk to them. Now I'm leaving out the minor things like telegraph and stuff in between, but and then the third big paradigm shift I think that happened in communication was, well, you could argue television was a paradigm shift, but it was one way. So it went from the broadcast out. But the internet itself, the medium we're using right now, was indeed, I believe, a paradigm shift in communication, because it made it universal and bidirectional and deeply rich. It could contain video, it could contain audio, it could contain trade, education. So in other words, it replicated life as we know it, to quote Star Trek, but brought it online and made it instant. Anywhere you were in the world, you could communicate with anybody else, anywhere else in the world. So it was a paradigm shift. We had similar paradigm shifts, obviously, in transport, say, with the advent of the wheel and then the train and then the car. And again, in, say, energy. So, we had the conversion of coal into steam, which gave us energy, but more importantly, the advent of power lines, the generation of electricity and the advent of power lines has been equally as significant, say, as the internet in the energy area. So major innovations cause paradigm shifts. Within that, then there's loads of room for the little guys who are doing small innovations, because a paradigm shift creates opportunity for both improvement and problems to solve. And on the internet, there's lots of room for improvement, lots of room for new ideas, and of course, lots of problems to solve. So we're in the small innovation business, filling in all the gaps inside the big paradigm shift.
Right. Well, because internet was so big and it's become so important and ubiquitous that, it's almost like going back to the days of telephone, like you said, where people just expect that when they picked up their receiver, there was a dial tone there. And that's become the expectation of the internet these days, that it's just always on. I mean, it's no longer sharing a line and getting off because someone needed to make a phone call, or all the various things that, I'm showing my age now, but all the various things that we had to suffer through as the internet grew. But of course, with internet and all that it brings, there are lots of security issues associated with it, right? And that's where someone like you and your company might come on board.
That's exactly it. So, with my networking and firewall company, obviously cybersecurity was always a big interest. And in terms of innovation, then within the paradigm shift of the advent of the internet, I could see lots of opportunity for cybersecurity innovation and so on. And of course, within the internet itself, one of the big paradigm shifts inside that major shift was the movement to the cloud. And I was exposed to that, as I mentioned already, because of our Google relationship. And the very first problem our very first customer had in the cloud was who's sharing what with whom, who has access to what, who's doing what. So it was, quite natural for me to innovate in that area because that's what the customer was asking for. So there was market demand, there was the ability to deliver, and there was the wherewithal to do it with the APIs and so on, and the software knowledge. So that's how we ended up innovating the sort of tools that we have in GAT.
Okay. And now, as far as GAT itself, maybe you could describe your view of the culture at GAT and how you see the company impacting overall cybersecurity landscape moving forward.
So, yeah, I think from the point of view of culture, I think we have a nice open culture. I think I mentioned this already, but some time ago on one of our many meetings, a guy, I'm not necessarily particularly fond of him, but Steve Jobs always had one insight that I really liked, and that was he once said, I don't hire smart people so I can tell them what to do. I hire smart people so they can tell me what to do. And I really like that attitude. So I've surrounded myself as best I can with smart people who I believe are fundamentally smarter than I am and certainly more knowledgeable about their own topic areas. And while I can put ideas out there, they tell me what is possible and what's not possible, and what we can do and what we can't do. So there's a culture of openness and sharing within the organization. I think that's really important and has been for our growth and our evolution. Yeah.
So you intentionally have not surrounded yourself with yes people that are just affirming the things you're saying, but somebody that might challenge you with cause, with good reason and logic.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I'd be if I floated an idea out there and nobody had a counterpoint to it, I'd be very worried about the idea. Either I wasn't communicating it properly or it was just so off the chart that it's not worth commenting on. But, there's very few ideas you can float, but somebody will see some angle to it.
Right.
And, interestingly enough, as you know, one of the big cohorts we work with, although it's not our main source of revenue, but we work a lot in education. And I'm constantly amazed at the ability of kids, particularly high school kids, to find loopholes in the software and in the infrastructure and in what we offer to either poke holes in the system or break out of the system and so on. So, nothing ever arrives fully formed. You have to constantly innovate to stay ahead of the collective imagination.
Yeah, the kids are always going to keep you on your toes, and the tough part as an educator is to throttle that enthusiasm and direct it in a positive direction.
Yes.
You don't want to discourage it entirely if they're creative and if there is some positive benefit to it. So that's always the balancing act. But we've talked a lot about your work at GAT and your previous experience and so on. But outside of GAT, are there any other interests that you are passionate about?
Well, I grew up on a farm, so I'm very interested always in the outdoors. Not that I go back to farming. I do remember how much work it was. And I really admire farmers. People don't appreciate the amount of work, sheer physical work it takes to put food on the table. And it happens somewhere out in the fields far, far away. But, I know it does happen. But I love the outdoors. And I actually, sort of obscure hobbies that I have. I love growing trees, and in particular pine trees. So where I live now is very near to botanic gardens, and I collect pine cone seeds of all different species from around the world,
Oh,
and
wow.
I grow saplings from them. And I've, quite a small wood going now from trees from China, from Mexico, and so on. My favorites from Mexico, Pinus montezuma. Um, so that's one side
And
thing I
you,
do to get my head out of the office, as they say.
no, that sounds great actually, and very different. I haven't heard of anybody doing that before, but you do that just for you. You're not turning around and reselling or giving
Oh,
away or anything like that, any of the
well,
materials. You're growing it for your own
own
pleasure.
interest. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I do swap some occasionally with. I have some other friends who are interested in plants, and I swap occasionally with them. So, I've um, swapped a few nice pines that I've grown from seeds in Gran Canaria for, say, monkey puzzle trees, and things like that, small things. And I think my other big interest actually is Asia. I'm very interested in the cultures of Asia, in particular China, but Japan and Korea as well. I think it's, as a Westerner, I think it's fascinating um, how the Eastern approach to life and the Eastern approach to doing business and so on contrasts so much with our own approach. I think we can learn an awful lot from the contrast. Um, and if you study it carefully, you can see what's good about Western systems, and you can also see what's good about Eastern systems. So,
You have to keep
and
an open mind to both. I mean, there's
you,
there's
you,
good
you
things in both.
absolutely, yeah. So, I
Interesting.
didn't mention this, but one of the things I did after finishing my maths degree was I did a philosophy diploma. And so I'm quite interested in how people think and the structures of thought and where ideas come from and so on. So the philosophical underpinnings for ideas and directions, I find that very interesting as well. And, the, a big divergence. Obviously, Western philosophy traces its roots back to the Greeks and so on. But in fact, the big divergence between East and West came with the advent of rationalism in the West, and that has underpinned all Western development to this point. Whether it's mathematics, the Cartesian plane, Descartes, um, Spinoza. So you have integration and um, all of that, all of the mathematical modeling that comes from rationalism has been fundamental in really driving the West ahead. And I think that understanding why that happened has been I think it's very interesting and very enlightening. And on the other side, the um, ability of Asian cultures to observe nature and to adopt and to be in harmony with nature is something that the West has to some extent lost sight of.
Right.
And that is a huge loss in our culture as well. So, both cultures have a lot to give,
Very
but you
interesting.
have to understand them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's talk about people that are looking to get into the industry, aspiring entrepreneurs. Do you have any advice that you would offer them? And are there any particular qualities that you believe are essential to be successful in the world of a startup today?
Well, I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, it goes back to what I said about innovation. Major innovative paradigm shifts like the advent of the internet or the movement within the internet to cloud create problems. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to identify what it is the problem and what
Hmm.
problem in particular you're going to solve. Um, so identify the problem and focus on that, develop the solution to that. And very early on, after you've developed the solution, charge for it, because there's nothing like the market to test the validity of your idea. If you can get paid for the solution you've developed, you have a business model, and go for it.
Well,
That's my only advice.
that's
Yeah,
great
identify the
advice.
problem and make sure it's a problem that people are willing to pay to have solved. And there's lots of those problems out there, So,
Sure.
um, yep, feel free to
Okay.
innovate. That's all I can say.
Terrific. So let's finish up by just looking ahead, if you can, about what your long-term goals and maybe your aspirations for GAT Labs or your overall entrepreneurial journey are. And do you envision expanding into new markets, technologies in the future, or starting down
Yeah.
another path?
So, one of the things I was particularly, or am particularly proud about in GAT Labs is our active ID technology, which I think fills or plugs a big hole in the security area, particularly in browser security. So, without divulging too much, because I don't want to give away our direction of travel, I think I still see huge problems in terms of security in the browser space in particular. And I think we have some very innovative technologies to solve those problems and also to report on those problems. So I see huge opportunity ahead in terms of what we can do in the cloud space, and in particular in the browser space. Out to the edge of the cloud is an expression I developed a few years back, and I really like it because I think it describes very well what we do. We're protecting not just at the center, like a lot of our competitors do, but right out to the edge. So we have, again, using a term, a marketing term, I guess, I've developed for GAT, we're a full stack solution.
Right.
So we go not only from the actual cloud APIs themselves, where the files are stored and the emails are stored, right out to the edge, to the browsers, where we're able to monitor all of the stages in between. So I think we can provide this full coverage in terms of audit, accountability, and of course, most importantly, then security, where we can enforce rules right out to the edge. So, yeah, in terms of where we're going, I still see a long road ahead. We have a lot of technology that I'd like to develop and bring to market, and I hope I can. I hope we remain successful.
I'm confident you will, based on your track record. So, okay. Well, Robert, it's been a real pleasure having you here today as our first guest on the Innovator Insights podcast, which is sponsored by GAT Labs, of course. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining today.
Scott, thank you very much. The pleasure was mine.
Thank you for listening to Innovator Insights, brought to you by GAT Labs. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Robert Baker and gained valuable insights. Don't forget to visit our website, innovatorinsights.io, to explore more episodes, read exclusive blogs, and subscribe to our mailing list for future content. If you found this episode interesting, please share it, leave a review, and subscribe to Innovator Insights on your favorite podcast platform.